Hillary Clinton pulled off a crooked land deal. Remember Whitewater? False. She was held responsible for the murder of White House lawyer Vince Foster. False. And the Clintons ran drugs out of Arkansas, killing dozens of people in the process. Really, really false.
Not only did we lose money on a piece of property called Whitewater Estates, the investment would spawn an investigation 15 years later that endured throughout Bill's presidency. It all started one day in the spring of 1978 when a businessman and longtime Politico named Jim McDougal approached us with a sure-thing deal. Bill and I had entered a partnership with Jim and his young wife Susan to buy 230 undeveloped acres on the south bank of the White River in North Arkansas. The plan was to subdivide the site for vacation homes, then sell the lots at a profit. The price was $202,611.20. Jim McDougal was a character, charming, witty, and eccentric as the day is long. With his white suits and baby blue Bentley, McDougal looked as if he'd just stepped out of a Tennessee Williams play. Despite his colorful habits, he had a solid reputation. He seemed to do business with everybody in the state, including the impeccable Senator J. William Fulbright, for whom he helped make a fortune in real estate. His credentials were reassuring to both of us. If all had gone according to plan, we would have turned over the investment after a few years, and that would have been the end of it. But by the time the development was surveyed and the lots were ready for sale, interest rates had gone through the roof. Rather than take a huge loss, we held on to Whitewater, making some improvements and building a model home while hoping for an economic turnaround. From time to time over the next several years, Jim asked us to write checks to help make interest payments or other contributions, and we never questioned his judgment. We didn't realize that he was becoming involved in a raft of dubious business schemes. Travelgate, as it came to be known in the media, was perhaps worthy of a 2 or 3 week lifespan. Instead, in a partisan political climate, it became the first manifestation of an obsession for investigation that persisted into the next millennium. Before we moved into the White House, neither Bill nor I nor our immediate staff had known that there was a White House travel office. The travel office charters planes, books hotel rooms, orders meals, and generally takes care of the press when they travel with the president. An audit had discovered that the director of the travel office kept an off-book ledger, that a minimum of $18,000 of checks had not been properly accounted for, and that the office's records were in shambles. Based on these findings, Mack and the White House counsel's office decided to fire the travel office staff and reorganize the department. These actions, which seemed like no-brainers to the decision-makers involved, ignited a firestorm. At least 7 separate investigations, including those conducted by the White House, the General Accounting Office, the FBI, and Kenneth Starr's Office of the Independent Counsel, failed to turn up any illegality, wrongdoing, or conflicts of interest by anyone in the administration, and confirmed that the initial concerns about the travel office were justified. Vince Foster was stung by the travel office affair. A meticulous, decent, and honorable man, he felt that he had let down the president and me by failing to understand and contain the drama. Apparently, the final blow came in a series of spiteful editorials published in the Wall Street Journal, which attacked the integrity and competence of all the Arkansas lawyers in the Clinton administration. On June 17, 1993, an editorial titled, "Who is Vince Foster?" proclaimed that the most disturbing thing about the administration was its carelessness about following the law. Bill and I may have been inexperienced in our White House roles, but we were seasoned enough in the rough world of politics. We knew we had to isolate the attacks and focus on the reality of our lives. Vince Foster had no such defenses. Although we will never know what went through his mind in those last weeks of his life, I believe that as he absorbed each accusation, he was driven deeper into pain and distress. I will go to my own grave, wishing I had spent more time with him and had somehow seen the signs of his despair. Vince's funeral service was held in Little Rock's St. Andrew's Cathedral. After the service, we drove in a long, mournful caravan to Hope, where Vince was born and raised. It was a blazing summer day, and heat rose in waves over the dusty fields. Vince was buried just outside of town. By then, I was beyond words. Numb. All I could feel was a vague notion that Vince was finally safe now, back home where he belonged. Soon, a cottage industry of conspiracy theorists and investigators were trying to prove that Vince was murdered to cover up what he knew about Whitewater. Those rumors should have ended with the official report ruling his death a suicide, and with the sheet of notepaper found torn into 27 pieces at the bottom of Vince's briefcase. It was not so much a suicide note as a cry from the heart, an accounting of the things that were tearing at his soul. I was not meant for the job in the spotlight of public life in Washington. Here ruining people is considered sport, he wrote. The public will never believe the innocence of the Clintons and their loyal staff. The Wall Street Journal editors lie without consequence. Those words left me grief-stricken. His short time in public service destroyed his self-image, and in his mind, irreparably stained his reputation. The 6 months since the exuberance of Inauguration Day had been brutal. My father and close friend dead, Vince's wife, children, family, and friends devastated, my mother-in-law dying, the faltering missteps of a new administration being literally turned into federal cases. I was on automatic pilot, pushing myself to attend healthcare meetings on the Hill and deliver speeches, often on the verge of weeping. If I met someone who reminded me of my father, or I ran across a nasty comment about Vince, I would feel the tears well up in my eyes. This was one of the times when I kept going on sheer willpower. On Halloween 1993, I picked up a copy of the Sunday Washington Post and learned that our old, money-losing real estate venture in Arkansas had come back to haunt us. Because of our past connection with McDougal, we were wrongly implicated in his subsequent misadventures. During the 1992 presidential race, allegations surfaced in the press and were quickly dismissed that McDougal had received special favors from the state when Bill was governor because of his business relationship with us. The story faded when Bill and I proved that we had lost money on the Whitewater investment and that while he was governor, the Arkansas Securities Department had actually urged the federal regulators to remove McDougal and shut down his savings and loan, Madison Guarantee. Bill and I failed to recognize the political significance of Whitewater's sudden reappearance. The name Whitewater came to represent a limitless investigation of our lives that cost the taxpayers over $70 million for the independent counsel investigations alone and never turned up any wrongdoing on our part. Bill and I voluntarily cooperated with investigators. Every time they leaked or leveled a new charge, we bent over backwards to make sure we hadn't missed or overlooked anything substantive. But as one allegation followed another, we realized we were chasing ghosts in a house of mirrors. We would run in one direction only to have the apparition pop up behind us. Whitewater never seemed real because it wasn't. The purpose of the investigations was to discredit the president and the administration and slow down its momentum. Whitewater was a political war from the start, and it raged throughout Bill Clinton's presidency. It didn't matter what the investigations were about. It only mattered that there were investigations. It didn't matter that we had done nothing wrong. It only mattered that our lives and the work of the president were disrupted over and over again. Whitewater became a convenient catch-all for any and all attacks that our political adversaries could design. Our personal lawyer, Bob Barnett, recused himself from Whitewater because his wife, Rita Braver, was a CBS correspondent assigned to cover the White House. Bob recommended David Kendall, his colleague at Williams & Conley, to represent us in the Whitewater matter. We had known David for years. Although he was a few years older than Bill and me, we had overlapped at Yale Law School. Like Bill, David was a Rhodes Scholar. As a fellow Midwesterner, David was born and raised in rural Indiana on a farm. He and I had a natural rapport. Soon he became an anchor in our lives. David met with us in the White House every week or so for the next 3 months. As I listened with fascination, he filled us in on what he had learned while piecing together gaps in the Whitewater record and tracing Jim McDougal's increasingly bizarre investments. Trying to recreate McDougal's paper trail, he said, was like shoveling smoke. The media fixation with Whitewater continued throughout the holiday season. Vince Foster was being hounded beyond the grave. A week before Christmas, the press reported that some of his files, including Whitewater documents, had been, quote, spirited out of his office by Bernie Nussbaum, the White House counsel. Then we were confronted with an outrageous partisan attack. On Saturday, December 18th, I was hosting a holiday reception when David Kendall reached me by telephone. "Hillary," he said, "I've got to tell you about something very, very ugly." I sat down and listened as David summarized a long, detailed article that would appear in the American Spectator, a right-wing monthly that regularly attacked the administration. The article, written by David Brock, was filled with the most vile stories I had ever heard, worse than the salacious garbage in supermarket tabloids.